There we are. All right. So I call to order the Board of Education Policy Committee meeting of May 3rd. It is now 6:02. And I know that we've got another committee meeting right after this for some of the participants. So I'll try to end this one at 6:55 so that everybody gets a short break before the next one. But that being said, we have a very aggressive agenda. I know that we're not going to make it through everything. Some of this was for the purpose of at least putting it on our radars for thinking about so that we can address it in the next meeting and stuff. All right, the first policy, actually the first two policies on the agenda, 4118.1 and 5145.5, you guys will remember we actually talked about in our April committee meeting. There were some questions that the committee members asked us to follow up with. So Dr. De Silva got some answers from our attorneys on those, and I'm able to, do you want me to share that, Dr. De Silva, or do you want me to share their thoughts?
That's fine. I have them here if you miss anything, but yeah, go ahead.
Right ahead. You can go ahead.
You want me to jump in?
Sure.
Okay, so the first, let me just make sure. Okay, I want to make sure we're in order. So 411811. The first question was, why does actually, hang on a second.
I think that one actually is for the full board.
Then maybe Margaret, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. So so on both 4118.1 and 5145.5, there were some questions about sexual harassment and sexual discrimination. Why was sexual discrimination pulled out from the other non-discrimination policies? I think, Ken, I think you had the question, but it was a good question. So the response from the attorneys was, sexual harassment and sex discrimination have their own specific board policies because public school districts must comply with Title IX, which prohibits sex-based discrimination in any public school. Title IX has specific procedures that must be followed when there is a claim of sex discrimination or sexual harassment. So these types of discrimination have their own board policy and related procedures regulations. So that explains why they're separated out from the regular non-discrimination and harassment policies. All right. The other one that was a question that pertained to both was, I think, Nora, you brought up, and it was about outside of the United States. So why does a violation of Title IX require that the conduct occur in the United States? And okay, she said, yep. Under the new Title IX regulations that became effective August 2020, so just recently, a violation of Title IX can only occur if the conduct occurs within the United States. This is found in 34 CFR section 106.8D. In your example of a school-sponsored trip abroad, a student or employee could be disciplined for his or her conduct under a different board policy or code of conduct, but it would not include a Title IX investigation or discipline pursuant to Title IX. So, again, another good question, and it does indicate that on a trip like that, there would be other policies that would come into play, but not specifically this one. Okay, so then the first one on this, we had one other question that was specific just for this 4118.1, and it had to do with the violations of this policy, which I think was on the last page. We were concerned because it wasn't clear to us. It was under the reporting sex discrimination or sexual harassment on page 3 of 3 of the old one, above all of the legal. Specifically, about retaliation against any employee for complaining about sex discrimination or sexual harassment is prohibited under this policy and illegal under state and federal law. And then the violations of this policy will not be permitted and may result in discipline up to and including discharge from employment. So we had talked about that not being clear, that we felt it wasn't clear as written, and wanted to move that sentence about retaliation up to the paragraph beforehand. So it followed the last sentence of the first paragraph. The board directs its employees to respond to such complaints in a prompt and equitable manner, and then retaliation against any employee. And then new paragraph would be violations of this policy will not be permitted and may result in discipline up to and including discharge from employment. So the attorney's response on that, it just gives clarification about how they wrote it, but I think they're also fine with how we may have laid it out, although we can give the language to them specifically. But what they said is that violations of this policy refers to a violation of any part of the board policy, such that anyone who engages in sex discrimination, sexual harassment, or retaliation against complaints who report sex discrimination, sexual harassment can be disciplined pursuant to the policy. Additionally, if an employee fails to follow the policy's requirements for the prompt and fair investigation of such a matter, they may also be subject to discipline. So it actually, that violation piece does refer to both types, perpetrator and reporter. I think that answers.
So then should that be pulled out of the reporting sex discrimination then? If it applies to things beyond reporting, why do we have it, or why is it included under reporting if it applies to other parts of the policy also?
Good. Yeah, that's a good question.
I'm not sure. So Ken, you're suggesting to pull it out of reporting.
So that
I'm just saying if
right?
if the lawyer is saying that it applies to the reporting and also other, I say I'm okay with it at the end. It was the I like how we had talked about rearranging it.
Yeah.
I was just responding to the lawyer's point.
Yeah, and I think, Ken, to your point, I know what your question is. So I feel like our solution of moving it to its own paragraph makes that clear, because then it's not under reporting, right? It feels like it.
I mean, it's still technically there, but yeah, no, it applies to everything above it.
Right. Everything above it, exactly.
So Margaret, if we made that shift, then I would just send it off to Rebecca to make sure that there's no concerns there before we bring it to the board on May 10th, possibly.
Yep. You can do that.
And when I spoke to her before she actually emailed, she seemed to be okay with that shift, Ken, our original paragraph shift, but I just would want to make sure in writing that it was okay.
Like that. Were there, I think that covered all the questions that we had on this one. Were there any new questions that came up, or?
Margaret, where was it this policy or a different one when the issue of the word color?
That was in one of the ones that's coming before the board on Monday night. It was the non-discrimination policies. I think it was all of them, actually, because it included that in the description. But those.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say that. So that's for Monday night's first read of the policies.
Okay. So do you want to speak to that now or just speak to it on Monday night?
Sure, we can do that. Do you want to go ahead?
So Ken, I think it was your question that the word or the term color, if you remember that conversation. And so I had asked for, that was, we had asked for clarification on, because I think there was a sentiment that perhaps that word could be perceived in some cases as offensive. And so basically what Rebecca responded is, because the term color is used in the non-discrimination policies, because it is one of the protected characteristics under both the federal and the state non-discrimination laws. That's why it's used in our policies.
Okay. That makes sense. And I did some additional research on it myself, just additional learning. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Understood.
I guess if we want to even clarify, this will go the other policy that's going before the full board on Monday night for first read. We don't have it in front of us, but that's that 4118.11. Dr. De Silva, do you want me to mention that? That was about the genetic information.
Go ahead, Margaret, because I'll have to pull that back up.
Yeah. So this was policy 4118.11, which was non-discrimination for personnel. And I think that there was a question regarding the genetic information, and we were wondering why that would be included in there. So and again, we can, we'll bring this to the full board on Monday as well, so they understand, but only the personnel non-discrimination policy prohibits discrimination on the basis of genetic information because of a federal law. Title II of the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008. It prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of genetic information. It applies only on the employment context, so it is not included in the student or community non-discrimination policies. So it looks like there's a legal reason for that. But again, that one's not before us tonight. That'll be for Monday. But we followed up on all that. Thank you, Dr. De Silva, for following up with. All right, so 4118.1. I think we answered all the questions that were before. Doesn't look like there's any more questions unless I missed it. So are we comfortable? What we will follow up with Shipman and Goodwin just to make sure that they're okay with that change of the paragraph and sentence on page 3 of 3. But assuming that, is everyone okay with this going for a first read to the full board? Great, awesome. The next policy again that came before us in April is that 5145.5. I think I just answered all the questions that we had for that one. Were there any that we missed, or do you guys have any further ones?
I'm all set.
Okay. Ken, did you have anything? All set? All right, so that one will move forward for the next meeting.
So we're going to add those on to May 10th, right, Margaret?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
All right, so this next one is the online courses credit policy. And the reason this came up, and I'm going to hand it over to Assistant Superintendent Corey Gillette in just a second, but the reason this came up is because we don't have a policy right now for this. The only place it is in our policies is under the graduation requirements, because it's statutorily, actually, we have to give credit. But we did notice that it was in both the CABE model policy and the Shipman model policy. So we knew we had to adopt one. And obviously now having Ms. Gillette on board, wanted to be able to address this. It's also obviously a very different world for us as far as online courses now. Corey Gillette, I don't know if you or Dr. De Silva wanted to talk about this a little bit.
So I can start and then you can direct me a little bit through this process.
Sure.
So I thank you for letting us bring this up now, because as we're moving into the summer, we are going to be offering students the opportunity to recover credits using an online platform. It's something called Edmentum. So not only are students able, like they were in the past, to take certain approved courses online and get credit, now that's part of how we're helping students recover credit. So in consultation with the high school and the counseling department and the administrators there are so many different layers to this. So I don't even know where you want to start in terms of going through this. Now, we've looked at the Shipman and the CABE one. I think the Shipman just is easier to attack, but there would be we have a lot of edits on it. So it's still not, neither one feels like it would capture all of the layers.
Yep.
So how do you do that? How do you proceed when you see that?
Yeah, I think we can pick the model that we want to work from and then adapt it to our practices and what we need here in Richfield. And I would say if Shipman is a good baseline, then let's go with that, especially because I do think there is a legal component, right? Because at the very least, we legally have to provide some credit for some online courses, correct?
Yeah, and I think currently our current policy,
Yes.
our graduation policy covers it enough. But then the other thing, so we're thinking about, one is this course recovery, two is just giving kids options to enhance their educational experience moving forward. And then three, the other thing that we're trying to figure out is if kids come to us with credits from other organizations and want that credit to be applied towards graduation, how do we determine which organizations we would accept credit from? So that's another layer to add into this. So we can start, I mean, we've made edits to and suggestions to the shipment. So we could start just going through it. And then if you want, I can add them in or whatever your next process is as we move forward and figuring this out.
Yeah, so I might suggest, but feel free, anybody else to chime in. I might suggest, let's use the shipment as the model. Corey, we can walk through it. You can tell us your suggested edits as we go through, and then this will probably come back to committee anyway. So in that next iteration, we could just have a red line version to kind of go through. If that
Okay.
makes sense. Can I ask, so are we mostly focusing, because it was helpful for you just to give us some scenarios of why this is important. So obviously at the high school it is. I did notice like in the CABE one, they do have some allowance for elementary and middle school. Is that something that we're contemplating?
Corey, do you want to speak to just that?
I'm thinking
Today.
I was thinking about that because, hold on, let me just, the one distinction that I'm a little bit stuck on, I think that's such a good question, is the credit part. And that's where high school differentiates from K-8. So I feel like of all the things that we need to figure out, that credit part would be the most important, because really, and I think Dr. De Silva can clarify further, but homeschooling and any other grade levels, credit's not involved. So it's much more flexible in and out system structure, I guess, coming in and out of a district than it would be if you were taking some online and wanted to get then credit for it when you come into a school district.
Okay.
So Corey, in the RHS handbook, was there any guidance on just the practices around awarding credit for online institutions that are not ours?
They do have some, the Board of Regents, nationally accredited, but it doesn't have to be nationally accredited. Yes, provided by a nationally accredited organization or the Board of Regents. That's what they currently have. Guidelines with the State Board of Education.
So then in terms of process, Margaret, should we go through the shipment policy as a starting point? And then Corey, you could perhaps identify within the policy, was there anything that you felt needed to be removed or what was missing within shipment?
Yep, I can do that.
Yep.
Okay, so on the shipment document underneath district provided distance learning. My interpretation of this document is that they tried to capture COVID and then try to talk about how we could give credit based on that. So it says in the second line, distance learning offered by the board. So that was something that we wanted to think about, because do we always want it to be provided by the board, or is there some choice for students in terms of online learning?
This part is specific to COVID, right?
Okay. But again, it's COVID's past. So aren't we looking for, well, I mean, it's past, it's not past, but are we looking for other similar situations? Right. I think.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to do a policy, I think it should apply to any scenario that might come up. My first thought looking at that was what you just said, Corey, was, it says any other long-term school closure related to a community-wide emergency, but what if it's a child that has an illness that prevents him or her from being in school? Would online instruction be available to that child?
So not just your choice, it could be your specific need. And I know we must have some policies around medical. I have to look at that.
Yeah, I think we do, but I think, perhaps the online course credit would work.
Encompass that.
Because I know I'm sure it's some type of distance learning, and I would imagine that they do get credit for that. But I would think that this should speak to that if we're writing a policy about it.
And the other part that we felt about this paragraph that was important was how we would give credit would not be determined by the teacher teaching the course, but instead based on a district policy, building-based policy. because when we all went home in March, we had to decide how we were going to grade students as a group. That wasn't done by an individual teacher. That was done by the district. So we don't want it to be just relying on one teacher, one class. We want it to be based on a greater policy. That would be an edit there.
Corey, I read actually when I read that as it's the teacher that would determine if that child met the district mandated requirements. So like for participation, and yes, the student turned in all of his or her work, the student attended class remotely every day, you know, whatever the requirements.
Okay, I read it differently. Okay.
But I think that, which means that we should add some clarifying language to that, because we don't want anyone to read it differently. We should have it all read it the same way. See, that's it.
And then down to requirements, we added regionally accredited. And we have our team both said regionally and nationally accredited.
Could something be regionally accredited but not
Not be
nationally?
nationally.
Or vice versa? Actually, vice versa would be
The word, yeah.
So, but if not, then yeah, I think both. It doesn't hurt to have both. I don't if it's not redundant.
Okay.
If I may, I hate to keep switching the order of the paragraphs of Shipman and Goodwin,
Yeah.
but in many ways, to me, the district provided distance learning is different. It's distinguished between, there's a distinguishing piece here between that and online coursework.
Right.
Because the way in which the district provided distance learning is, Corey, it is the boards. When we're providing the distance learning, I don't think that there's any question that it's aligned to our curriculum, right?
Right. I'm hearing you. But when you pick a course,
that's different. So I feel like that district provided distance learning needs to be distinguished from the online coursework, and how this policy is originally written is credit for online courses. Online courses, at least from my point of view, and distance learning are different.
yeah, I see that.
So for example, I think when you were looking at this policy, you were thinking about, for example, the credit recovery over the summer, right? And what that actually is going to look like for kids. To me, that's online coursework as opposed to distance learning.
Yes.
And I think this piece about distance learning is they're saying, okay, there's a COVID-19 health, and it's almost like a fail safe, right? In the event that there's a long-term school closure like COVID-19, that we have the ability to use that learning towards graduation, that there's not going to be a question that that we're meeting the needs of students to graduate. I think that's why that's there. To me, it's a little bit out of order.
Yes, I think that was confusing, actually, having it like that. But you're right. There are two different things there. One is, should this ever happen again where we have to provide distance learning to large groups of students? And the other one is, what are our requirements for students individually looking to bolster their credits?
Right, or bolster, or perhaps transfer, or anything else, I guess, right?
Yep.
Margaret, I'm curious if you read it the same way that I am.
I did. I felt like, so I keep going back and forth looking at the K one, because the K one as written, I think is confusing because it mushes everything together. This one's clear in terms of structure. But I do think there are elements of the K one that give detail under some of these buckets, but I did read it the same way as you, Susie.
Yes, I know. I started almost pulling out paragraphs from the Cade one and feeling like that it fit in better, but it just is so dense.
Right, the structure just wasn't there.
And the title for the Shipman one is, really doesn't infer that, it's about distance learning, right? So credit for online courses, I took that completely as credit recovery. and, you know, and needing that extra course that you might have done poorly in or something. But then in the CAPE policy, it talks about students taking such courses must be enrolled and take the courses during the regular school day at the school site, which really doesn't make sense because we're talking about summertime and potentially on the weekend if someone was doing an online course. So
Correct.
it is confusing.
And it starts, the Shipman one in the second paragraph is talking about the pre-approval process.
Right.
And then it's almost like you go from pre-approval to requirements for online work.
Mhm.
And then the last part under additional requirements is the expenses part, which was another thing that the team I worked with. And that I also saw in CABE, but that is something that we want to make sure it's most likely there won't be an expense if it's obviously depending on the scenario. So making it more open.
Right. So I wonder, just as one point of clarification, just because I think this is an easier one, is as I said, we don't have a policy currently, and our policies, we try to follow the CABE model. So in that, not meaning the CABE model policy, but the CABE numbering system.
Yeah.
We would, whichever version, whatever we write, I think we would assign that CABE number of 6172.6 to it.
Okay.
And I might, to Nora's point, I wonder if we should also just adopt that language of the policy name, because it feels like it's more encompassing of whatever our content is, rather than just credit for online courses. To say distance education, virtual online courses, right?
Okay.
I don't know.
No, I agree. I agree.
Did I miss it in CABE's model policy that there's anything about COVID or a health crisis?
I don't think I saw it.
I was looking specifically when I was doing the tech stuff, and there didn't seem to be anything for like distance learning. That's one of the keywords I was looking for, and I couldn't find anything.
And the CABE one does seem a little bit outdated to our current structure, just in terms of how kids pick an online course. Because again, number one, it says the course is not offered at the district's high school, and course recovery, it would be offered, you just be taking it in another format. And I think we want to make sure that we're not too limited moving into next year and the flexibility that we might need to offer. So I know that's very important to us.
So I wonder if, just in the interest of clarifying here, so I wonder if, again, maybe Corey, you can come back to the next committee meeting with some adjustments, like, well, again, we'll use the Shipman model policy as our baseline. We'll call it 6172.6, and with that new title of
Distance education. Yeah.
And then, but maybe what you can do is under the structure, the Shipman structure, give that clarity of practice, just to make sure like that it's not, that all of those scenarios you've contemplated, that it fits within this policy, so that nothing that we're doing is in violation of a policy or is,
Okay.
does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
And maybe, I don't know if Nora or Ken, if you have any like global questions that we might want to ask. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nora.
I was actually, thanks, Ken. I was just wondering, I mean, this particular policy won't be the policy that talks about distance learning in the future, right? I mean, it seems separate from that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying with that paragraph. It's like it's almost like they just kind of threw it in there just to
Cover
make
it.
sure that it was covered.
Yeah,
I thought it was confusing, especially the way it is.
it feels like it should be two separate policies. That was my thought.
Yeah, or there's not a distance learning, because right now, I guess
I vote for that.
it's really a credit for the way in which it's written by Shipman. The title is actually accurate. That weird paragraph in the middle that's just kind of thrown in there about distance learning like I said, it just seems like they wanted to make sure that people understood that, because really when you're online and you're not in physical school, it's distance learning, right? And then there's this other thing that we call distance learning, like right now during a pandemic, where it's distance learning, but it's school, at least the way in which we've
Right.
Yeah.
outlined a child's experience is at school. Now, if there's a different way in which we're going to model or have, and, and based on the things that we're hearing from the governor right now with any type of mandate around distance learning where it would shift the model, then maybe that's the kind of conversation that we should be having. But I actually don't even believe that this belongs here. I think that
That would make more sense.
Fair.
So can you just take that part out? That's fine. Because then it would really really the title should be credit for online courses. Then we would go back to the shipment title, I would think.
And if anything, it would be that distance learning piece might be at the end that might just state something like, in the event, right, that in the event that there would be a health emergency or a long-term school closure, like it says here, then it goes on to say the determination of successful participation is made by the district exactly the way it's here. So I think if anything, it belongs at the end to be clear that
This is it's separate from that, right?
it's separate, but still students can still receive credit towards graduation and that
Okay.
type of experience. But again, it seems like it's assumed if it's if it's a board created structure, but
Okay.
So are we saying, do we want to add that at the end just to make sure we're covered, but that it's not in the middle of the policy so that it's confusing?
Yes.
Okay.
that would be my suggestion.
Can I ask, Corey, you brought up the point about the paying. So I
Yeah.
wonder before we leave this topic, if we should talk about that, because I think Cabe said the school pay, I don't know, one said the school pays, one said parents pay, so.
Yeah, so
What was key?
in my opinion, the only time that the district would be responsible for paying for an online course would be if we did not have the ability to offer that course, right? There was something there was a gaping hole somewhere that we then had to offer. And by the way, there are very rare circumstances where a student at the high school level has a particular path that's had a stop, like there were no other courses in which the child could take. And so therefore, I've experienced where we did have to produce an online course for that child, purchasing it from another institution at which the district covered the cost. So often happens like in a math or a science where a student no longer, he can hit the capacity in terms of the types of courses that he or she is taking. And therefore, then it might be at the expense of the district. So if there was any question around expense, I would perhaps add language that would suggest that or would state that the only time in which the district or the board would be responsible for cost would be that the district did not have the ability to provide the programming that this student needed.
Can
And
I,
I think that Edmentum thing, sorry.
oh, go ahead.
It's just, the question would be moving forward with this platform, Edmentum, like momentum. I couldn't get it right till I figured that out. So we are using it and we are paying for it as part of our bridge program this summer for course recovery. And I'm anticipating, as is the team that's working with it, that we might find more uses for that across the year. So that might be a case, depending on how it's used, the kids are getting some credit through that, almost like they get another chance. So does that mean that they would pay for it? Which they, not if it's like an intervention.
Probably a conversation for the team and then to come back, Corey. But if I were to look at it right at that superficial level, is that we've provided students with the courses to be successful, right? For a number of different reasons, at times students aren't, and therefore need credit recovery. In a typical year, students would be paying for that, correct?
Right.
Or their families would be paying for that.
Right.
This particular year, given the fact that we're in the situation that we're in, we're giving kids as many opportunities as we can. And at the district's expense, we're paying for that online credit recovery process. But that is because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. So I think we would have to probably, again, in committee, but to me, if the courses are offered during, the standard year and the student cannot meet success for those, whatever variables those are, and therefore then would be taking this in the summer months for credit recovery, it would be at the family's expense, because we've offered the program the way that I'm seeing it. Now, what you're describing is a little bit different, because there's a subtle nuance. Is there an opportunity for the student to access this during the school year?
Right.
And
that might make it a little different if it's offered.
Dr. De Silva, how does summer school work?
Traditionally, or this year?
Traditionally.
Traditionally, it's at the family's expense.
Okay. So
we only offer it at the high school, right? So that's exactly, Ken. That's I'm trying to run that parallel.
Yep.
And the reason is because we do offer what the children need during the school year.
And I think another scenario would be, I think you said it very well, that as a district we're unable to offer it, but it could also be because of because of the accommodations for a particular student, whether it's health or some other. So we were not able to provide an in-person learning experience for that student. Therefore, that would still be at our expense, just because we need to educate all children.
Right.
So I think the way you had worded it, Dr. De Silva, would encompass that. That was just one more example.
But what it would not cover, because I know like the multivariable calculus is the one that's come up before, like where we've had to offer that until we offered it internally. But one that it would not cover is let's say German, right? Where a few years ago we canceled German, so it's not offered by the district anymore. But we're not saying that we'll cover that for families who still want German. We just couldn't get a German teacher.
But we offered the world language component for which they could graduate.
Okay.
Right. So, I mean, I'd love for kids to speak Portuguese. Well, that's not offered. So they're going to have to take one of the options that we have available, but we do have options available so that they can graduate, right? So that they can meet that requirement.
And also I saw in CABE that there was something about integrating online courses, and maybe that's really where Edmentum might fit in. It's just, we have that on our mind right now. So maybe it's not even relevant here then.
Yeah, I think it's good to run some of those real scenarios through your mind when you draft up the policy with the practice is, run through those and make sure that they're covered. I'm sorry, Ken, was your hand raised?
It was.
It was. Go ahead.
I just had one question, a little bit unrelated to that. Under additional requirements, I know this is all going to get rewritten and rearranged, but it says that only students in grades 9 or 12 are eligible to receive credit towards high school graduation by taking online courses. What about in the instance of a very gifted middle schooler who 7th, 8th grade, maybe they're not socially or emotionally ready to be in high school, but intellectually they're not being challenged by middle school classes? Would that be something that we could offer or would offer as a district? Or is that more, you've got a really gifted child, you're going to have to
so I'm trying to think of a practical example, Ken, and operationally, not from Ridgefield, but from other communities, we have experienced that I have had children that, due to their very unique needs, needed an experience that was different than what we could offer. Typically, it ends up being in a content area. And whether we agree or disagree, it typically ends up in math, science. And because of that, we've had to offer a particular program from another institution, and I can name 5 of them that I write offhand, but from another institution to meet that child's needs. And ultimately it's because we were not able to meet their needs. Now, there are other ways in which we've done it before where we've had kids, travel to the high school. In this case, now we have this very unique opportunity that perhaps they can even stream in, right? That type of thing. But in the event that they couldn't, that we would then, at the district's expense, pay for a program to meet their needs. That said, it goes back to the earlier example that I mentioned before, where then eventually they get to a cap anyway at the high school. And so then we're now purchasing, some type of platform.
Yeah.
It's almost always online, to be able to provide an access point for that particular student.
Yeah, so that's where it came.
The
That's
short
where.
answer is yes,
Okay.
because if we don't have a program, right, in any case, to meet the child's needs, then you would have to find an alternative program.
Right, but then would that count towards their graduation requirements, or we would provide the class, but then once they got to the high school, we would have to add additional classes onto the end for their requirements.
Yeah, so if they were, it would be right. So I'm trying to imagine that scenario. And so that scenario in my mind would be that if it's a middle schooler, we're providing some type of differentiated program or class at the district's expense. And then they're getting their credits at the high school level when they're at the high school level, not prior to, because they're not a high school student.
Okay, so even though it would be the content would be high school level, they wouldn't get credit because they're not a high school student.
Right, because they're
That's
still
what we do in
accessing, right. Pardon
Have
me?
that in math right now. Right now in math, you can take, in middle school, you can take algebra, which is and you take a high school level course in middle school, and the same with geometry, and you don't get credit. You don't get high school credit, even though it's supposed to be same content as you would take in high school. It's just you started on that pathway beforehand. So you would not at this point, and that's a small group of our kids, but they don't get extra credit by doing
But
that.
they still have an endpoint that we can meet their needs at the high school.
Yes.
There are very rare instances where that even gets moved earlier, where then that we wouldn't have an access point for them at the high school level. So they're not skipping a grade, Ken. If they were skipping a grade, then we'd be thinking down the avenue that you're describing, but they're not.
Okay.
I did put it in.
I'm just remembering fondly the 6th grader that was in 3 of my senior classes. So it was,
Yeah, there's always
back in the day.
grader. I remember them too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have them, and every community does. So.
All right, great. So this will come back to us at our next meeting. So thank you. Yeah, we'll get this in place for you for the summer. And then we have this whole slew. The next thing on here is like what, 6 policies? This is Wes, this is your hour here.
Howdy.
Howdy.
Looks like Wes, it's going to be a few hours. So you have 10 minutes now.
I have 10 minutes to get through it. So
So you have
first
some
off,
easy ones, right?
yeah, so I broke these down as I normally do into I think easier ones that are pretty straightforward. I want to thank Margaret for finding me very vintage policies. I'm sure American pickers would be proud. So I have 2 right off the bat, just for time's sake. If you don't mind, I'll do the first one, then I'll jump to the second one that I think we can really dive into quickly. The first one is the first one, which is 6141.32, just the instructional technology. Our policy, I believe, is from 1998. I don't believe that it survived that long because it's bad. It survived that long because it's so general. It's basically saying we should teach technology and provide background, but it really is dated in saying access thousands of libraries and databases. We just don't really use that language anymore. The new one, so I didn't find a model policy from Shipman and Goodwin, but the latest K policy to me seems perfectly fine and should be in your packet. What I like about this policy is it breaks it down into 2 levels of responsibility. One is for the district's responsibility. It didn't focus on any nuances, like they need to learn databasing, they need to use information sources. It uses just more broad scope of whatever the technology needs to be used at the time. portray education for its needs. The other one, which I like personally, is it also puts a responsibility on the board to provide the district with those technologies to meet whatever the curricular need is, whatever the need is at that time and point in time, developing new technology. So yeah, I really do like the new CABE policy. I don't really see anything wrong with it. It seems pretty fine, and I like its lack of direct nuances saying like kids need to learn keyboarding skills or something like that. Something I've always find a problem with a lot of these policies. But yeah, anyone have any questions, any insight?
Ken?
I would just, I agree with you and all the points that you made. My one comment right now would be to remove in the second paragraph by the end of grade 12. I don't think that's necessary. And I would want our 8th graders to be able to, at their appropriate skill level, to be able to have these skills. I mean, they're not going to be as competent, an 8th grader is not going to be as competent as a 12th grader, but
yeah,
within there. So I think that it's unnecessary. We just want our students to be independent, competent, responsible. I don't think we need to specify
I agree.
I agree. That was a good suggestion. I like that.
Nora, I think I saw your hand as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with Wes as well. I had written that, the CABE policy seemed so collaborative between the board, the students, the staff, and it aligns with our goals. And it just was so much more fleshed out, clearly more detailed, but also up to date. So.
So do we feel comfortable we'll take out that piece, but do we feel comfortable bringing this to the full board for a first read at the next meeting? Awesome. Great. Good job, Wes.
Oh, look at that. First one. Well, we'll see. Let's see the next one, right?
Go ahead.
So we're going to skip down a little bit. And again, I found, in the packet, I found other policies, but just for time's sake, it is policy 4118.51. And this is the employee guidelines for use of social networking technology of electronic communications. So our current policy, not only mentioning MySpace, dating itself immensely, it has way too much nuanced rules for my liking. So if I kind of look at some highlights, rule 1 says, cannot mention or reference Richfield Public Schools in certain scenarios on social media. Employees must refrain from mentioning other employees on their personal social media. I remember 4, unless given written consent, employees may not use Richfield Public Schools logos or trademarks. I'm just envisioning lots of trade kind of pitfalls with this type of policy where the soccer coach has his Facebook image saying go Tigers, using a Richfield insignia. To me, it seems like it could be misconstrued where if I'm taking a photo of Dr. De Silva at Branchville, first day of kindergarten, without her written consent of that photo, it just seems very awkward. It's a very dated policy. And I actually really like the Shipman and Goodwin policy, which again gives more broad terms. It lacks that very specific nuance, very specific scenarios of written consent where it says, do not use social media for disrupting, undermining events. Do not use social media for harassment. It's very, very broad in the sense of yes, we do use social media. We do organize things through social media. Do not use it to create hostile work environments. The only difference I saw between the social media one from Shipman and Goodwin and then our original CABE one is our original CABE one did mention about using the school's social media for profit. And that's not present in the Shipman and Goodwin one. It just says violates the law. And I don't know from my background that deeply if doing something was just a violation of the law, that would kind of fall under that broad umbrella.
I think it also says violation of the law and board policies, right? So Karen probably can pull another board policy that would reflect.
Well, I do have to say, we do use this policy to say, if you're a coach, just don't like say, you're a rich public school coach and try to get business. So we do rely on that policy. So if there's some way to just put that in there, I would feel better, because I do use that language to say it's not for personal gain.
So Wes, let's look at our current policy. So we have this conversation, Wes, this is the conversation we talked about. We actually had a very specific example. You might remember that described exactly what Karen is speaking to, but I don't know. Let me just look to see where it says personal gain.
Karen, could you explain that again? I think I understood what you
So
were saying.
if you have a private company, we don't want you to sell your private company saying you're a Ridgefield Public School employee. You are, yes, but not, you can't use our logo and use us as your way to get a private personal gain. So we do ask people not to do that on their, Facebook or social media accounts.
So if like the example of the high school coach, if somebody wanted their child to have extra lacrosse one-on-one lessons, or the coach wanted to offer one-on-one lessons for college-bound kids, they couldn't say, well, yeah, I've been coaching at Ridgefield High School for 10 years.
Again, their resume might say that,
right,
but not to use the Ridgefield logo, the picture of the high school.
Right. So the social media aspect.
Exactly. To use us as your avenue for your personal gain.
So what we have within our policy, Karen, that you're describing is the rules concerning personal social media activity. And the one that I think you're speaking specifically to is that, and there's actually a lot of them, but I just lost it actually.
So as long as we can use another policy, that's fine. I just want to make sure that isn't lost.
Oh, here it is. It's number 7 on the 3rd page, 3 out of 3, where it says an employee may not use district-sponsored sites for private financial gain, political, commercial advertisement, and on. So what that does is it protects exactly from what Karen's describing, is you can have this amazing pickleball. I don't want to use an actual sport. So an amazing pickleball coach, right? That's won every pickleball tournament that could ever be. And now you have me with my private company, but the reason I'm getting business with my private company is because I'm this great pickleball coach for the district. And if I'm using the district's photos of the kids or the championship, trophies, I'm gaining business as a result of that other work. Now, like Karen said, if it's on my resume that I am the pickleball coach of the year, that's different. But if I'm going to be using social media to advertise, I think that's a little bit challenging. That said, there are other parts of our policy, like Wes said, that are limiting. And, as an example, the way that our policy is written, I can't remember which number it is, but if I have an RPS Instagram, right? So I use the RPS Instagram. Personally, I have an Instagram account also. I happen to follow RPS, my personal follows my professional, right? And now if I were to repost that great image on my personal, I would have needed to go ask, theoretically, me permission, right? Or Wes would have needed to, if this was Wes, he would have needed to ask me permission before he could even repost that great thing that's happening in our community. So there's parts of it. And I wonder, Wes, if maybe this policy wasn't as easy after all, is if you can go through the policy along with each of the numbers with Karen and identify which ones Karen feels are not reflected in any other policies that we have, and which ones need, perhaps as a result, need to stay in.
Absolutely.
Does
Where,
that make sense, Karen?
oh, sorry,
Sounds good.
Right, Ken.
where would or is there a policy on employees using social media during work hours? Like when they,
That's in here. That was
Yeah, is
in
that part of the acceptable use policy, Wes?
It's,
yeah,
but
is
it's,
that what it is?
I don't know if
Yeah.
it's acceptable use actually during work hours.
Actually, I think it was number 8 of the CABE policy, because that was something I had written down. And whether or not that should be added to the shipment list of 5.
Yep.
And just as another quick note, number 5 in the CABE policy, the shipment policy doesn't mention promoting violence at all.
Well, I think that falls under the umbrella of school policy and harassment.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's,
Okay,
I could tell Shipman picked those words very carefully to make sure that it wasn't like a 9 bulleted list. They wanted to have a very short and sweet, to make it as broad as possible for the district to accept.
Although, I could argue the K policy, the number 8, Ken,
Absolutely.
where it says shall not post updates to their status on any social networking. Oh, updates on their status. I don't really know what that means. Like,
Yeah, I mean, we do have like, invention convention going on now. It's
yeah, I mean, if
It's-
it's during my lunchtime or my own time during the workday, the normal school working hours, it seems a little antiquated not to allow a staff member to go on to their Instagram during their lunch or their Twitter to say, I love that communion dress. It's my time. Why would we
Yeah.
prohibit that? That seems a little too tight for me.
I'm just looking at the time and I know that some of you have to hop over to that other call. So again, Wes, thank you so much, for bringing these. I know it's a lot. So perhaps, as Dr. De Silva mentioned, if you and Ms. Dewing can get together and just talk about, some adaptations or even to be able to talk through in our next meeting. I'm wondering,
absolutely.
we may want to, just because it feels like, and Dr. De Silva, I'll speak with you about this, but because, Corey's policy and then some of Wes's policies, I feel like they're important to have in place prior to like the school year. And I know we're going to have to be able to get through 2 reads of the Board of Education to have them in place before the summer. So we may want to consider having another policy meeting towards the end of May, just to be able to get some of these things moved along before the summer, if that sounds. All right, great.
Sure.
That again, thank you, everybody. Thanks so much and have a good next
Thank you.
meeting.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.